What is going on, YouTube world? Today I am back in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm here at the Greensboro Hebrew Cemetery because I want to talk about the brutal murder of Edward LeBrun. So Ed was born on February 15th, 1960 here in Greensboro. And growing up, he pretty much had a normal childhood. He went to school, had friends, went to parties, probably played sports, but just your average kid, nothing too crazy. Well, fast forward to the 80s, Ed quickly became enthralled in the music industry. He wanted to be a DJ and he wanted to be a club promoter, and that is what he set out to do, and that's what he did. So Ed started his DJing gigs at a local nightclub here in Greensboro called Kilroy's. So he would book some gigs throughout the month there. And that's kind of how he got his start in the music industry, by doing DJing gigs at Kilroy's. Well, not long after, he wanted to own his own record store. And that is when he opened up Spins Records and Tapes. So Ed is kind of living the life. He's a DJ, club promoter, and now he's also a record store owner. So when he opened up his record store, everyone that was in the music world, that was a music aficionado, they flocked to Spins. That was the go-to for any kind of music, whether it be DJing equipment like turntables, vinyl records, cassette tapes, CDs, you name it, Spins had it. Spins was also really well known for having music that wasn't even released yet on shelves. So if you were a friend of Ed, you go in there and you buy something and you say, hey, do you have any new music that hasn't hit the shelves yet? Ed would probably burn a cassette or a CD for you with new music. That's kind of the guy he was. Again, he was known as the Rave King, or the Godfather of Rave. Those were kind of his nicknames around the area. So with Ed now being a record store owner, as well as being a very prominent DJ in the area, he wanted to turn his attention more to club promoting. And that is when the club Babylon opened in downtown Greensboro in 1994. Now, I read online that Ed was either an owner of Babylon, co-owner, or just a DJ at the club. Conflicting articles, so I'm not sure if he was an owner or a DJ or both, but I'll just say he was an owner slash DJ at the Babylon. So the Babylon opens, and this club, this nightclub, swiftly becomes the mecca, the hub of rave parties on the East Coast. So Ed starts promoting these insane parties on the first Friday of each month, called First Friday Parties. Kind of makes sense. So these First Friday parties draw the attention of all these kids and adults all over the East Coast, from states as far away as Florida all the way up to New York. All of these kids and adults would come to Greensboro just to get inside the doors at Babylon. And just like most parties, especially rave parties, there was a lot of drug use. A lot. And this kind of segues into the meat and potatoes of this story. So a lot of teens, and I'm talking not 18, 19-year-olds, but 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds would attend these rave parties. It was said that the doors would open for the younger crowd at 2:30 a.m. Parents would drop their kids off at this nightclub at 2:30 in the morning. And it was also said that some of these parties would last until the early morning hours, sometimes even until noon the next day. That's crazy. I don't know about all of you, but when I was that age, there was no way that my parents would let me out at 2:30 in the morning. So I don't know what they were thinking. So Ed and a friend of his would frequent a local Fuddruckers in the area off and on. And that is where a guy by the name of Mike, he was a bartender at Babylon. That's how Ed knew him. And that's why Ed would go to this Fuddruckers, is because Mike was the bartender at Babylon, and he was also the manager at this Fuddruckers. So Ed and his friend would go there. They would have a burger, maybe a beer or two, and they would just sit and talk a couple times throughout the week. They were pretty regular there. Well, one day, a busboy by the name of Zachary Grimes happens to see Ed at the Fuddruckers. And Mike, the manager, he happened to glance over, because he was talking with Ed and Ed's friend like he always did. He happened to glance over and saw Zachary looking at Ed kind of odd. So Mike walks over to Zachary and says, "Hey, do you know this guy Ed?" And Zach says, "Yeah, I know him. He's a club promoter. He's a DJ. I met him at his club, Babylon. I also have been to his house." And that's when Mike kind of looks at Zachary and says, "Oh, you must be one of Ed's boys." Wink, wink. Because Mike knew the kind of person Ed was. He knew Ed's darker side. So when Mike said that to Zachary, Zachary kind of brushed it off. He was like, "Nah, it's not like that. You know, he's just a DJ. I've been to his parties, you know, whatever." Well, Mike didn't know the fire that he was igniting inside of Zachary. So when Mike said that, Zachary kind of brushed it off. He went about his business. A few days later, Zachary decides he wants to confide in one of the new hires who was recently hired at Fuddruckers. And this guy's name is Robert Reed. So Zachary goes over to Robert. He tells Robert what happened to him a few months before his 17th birthday at Ed's house. He said, "Hey, I was at one of Ed's parties. After the party, we went back to his house, and that's where he had me do these crazy drugs and drinking and stuff like that. And I found myself in his bed the next day, and I know something happened." Because they all knew that Edward was gay. He loved men. Well, he loved young boys. So when Zachary told Robert about what happened, this really enraged Robert big time. Because when Robert was a kid, he was molested, and he has no room at all for someone being molested, especially a child. So this really set Robert off, and Robert really wanted to hurt Edward. So the two ended up kind of talking, and they came to the conclusion that we need to go and assault and rob Ed at his house. So what did these two guys do? Well, they went and got another compatriot. And this guy's name was Jonathan Coffey. So Jonathan Coffey was Zachary's roommate, which is crazy. But all three of them got to talking, and they figured out how they were going to go to Ed's house, assault him, rob him, take all of his stuff, and make him pay for what he has been doing to these young boys. Now, I would also say that Zachary, leading up to this point, has had a fascination with wanting to assault Ed. Every time he would see Ed, he would want to walk over and basically punch him in the face, because he just hated that guy. He hated Edward. Obviously, he had good reason. So fast forward to the night of August 15th of 1999. Robert, Zachary, and Jonathan get into a car and proceed to go over to Edward's home. So Robert gets out of the car, walks up to Ed's door, knocks, and Ed kind of cracks the door a little bit just to kind of peek out, and he sees Robert standing there. Now, Robert thought it would be best for him to go up to the door and knock because Ed didn't know him very well. And Robert also thought that he was the better looking of the three. And Ed would be more willing to open the door and invite him in if it was him. So Robert goes up there and knocks. Ed comes to the door, peeks out of the door. Robert says, "Hey, my car broke down. Do you mind if I come in and use your phone?" Well, Ed, very reluctant Ed, he says, "It may be better if you go down to the local mini mart and use their phone instead." So Robert, kind of agitated, he says, "Okay, fine." He walks back down, gets in the car, and the three boys drive off, and they go down to the local mini mart. This is where they would buy a pack of cigarettes, and they would stand outside behind the mini mart and discuss how they were going to gain entry into the house. So a little while later, they figure out a plan, and they proceed to go back over to Ed's house. This time, they say that Jonathan should go to the door because Ed has never seen him before. If Ed did, it was probably once in the past, but Ed would not remember him. And obviously, if Robert came back to the door and knocked, Ed would know something was up. He would know something is amiss. So they told Jonathan to go to the door, knock on it, and when Ed opened it, Jonathan proceeded to bust his way in, knocking the latch off the door, and this would send Ed falling backwards onto his back. And Robert immediately came through the door, and him and Jonathan would pin Ed to the ground with Robert's knee on Ed's neck, and they would tie Robert's hands behind his back. So after Robert was tied with his hands behind his back, the boys would go through the house and scavenge for things that they wanted to take, like DJ equipment, personal belongings, whatever they could find. So with the three boys ransacking the house and Edward looking on in terror, Ed looks over and tells the boys, "Look, just take what you want and get out of my house." Well, this does not work. The boys continue to rummage through the house, stealing things, assaulting Ed a few more times, and this goes on for a couple of hours. Well, a little while later, Zachary and Jonathan are down by the front door with all the items that they've taken, and they're ready to leave. They tell Robert, "Look, let's go ahead and go. We have what we want. We've already assaulted him. He's learned his lesson. Let's just go." Well, Robert, being the hothead that he is and always has been, he basically said, "No way. If we let him go, let him live, he will rat us out, and we will get into a lot of trouble." So Robert takes Ed, with his hands still tied behind his back, upstairs to the master bedroom, where he proceeds to torture Ed like no other. Robert takes out a syringe from his back pocket that he had filled with Windex cleaner prior to the burglary. And so when Robert pulls the syringe out of his pocket, he looks over at Ed and he asks Ed, "Sedative or die?" And so Edward, really not having much of a choice, he basically just looked at Robert and said, "Do what you have to do." So Robert takes the syringe and jabs it into the neck of Edward, filling Edward with Windex cleaner. Well, once Robert saw that the Windex cleaner wasn't doing anything, He then asked Jonathan to go downstairs to the kitchen and find something a little more potent. And that is when Jonathan went downstairs and found concentrated simple green cleaner. So Jonathan filled the syringe up with that, came back upstairs, handed the syringe back to Robert, and Robert then jabbed the syringe again back into Edward's neck, filling his bloodstream with simple green cleaner. And after a few minutes, Robert could see that this was taking a big effect on Edward. He was gurgling, and it looked like Edward was not going to be alive much longer. So that is when Robert pulled out a dagger and began stabbing Edward 12 times in the neck and the chest, ultimately killing Edward in the process. So after Robert could see that Edward had passed, they hightailed it out of the house, got in the car, and drove to a nearby ATM because they took Edward's wallet in the process, and they also got the PIN number from Edward for his debit card. They took his debit card, went to an ATM, and withdrew $500 cash. And so they went back home, went back to sleep, because the next day, Zachary had to open up at Fuddruckers, and later on in the day, Robert had to go to work also at Fuddruckers, but he wasn't supposed to clock in until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The following day, which would have been a Monday, August the 16th, Sean, the manager at Spins, notices that Ed did not come into work. And he said in an interview that Ed always came in on Mondays to process orders that happened over the weekend. Ed was always at work on Mondays. So when he did not see Ed at work that Monday morning, he decided to go and do a welfare check. That's when they went to Ed's house, and they found Ed upstairs in his bedroom in a pool of his own blood, obviously dead. So they freaked out, called the cops, obviously. They came out, did an investigation, but could not really find any great credible evidence to have any leads. So over the course of about 2 days, Greensboro police ended up arresting a person by the name of Tim Laney. All because Tim had Edward's debit card. He went and used Ed's debit card, and this is where a surveillance photo was taken of him using the card, and that's when police picked him up and booked him for the murder of Ed. Well, Zachary, Jonathan, and Robert, when they hear the news that someone was arrested for the murder of Edward LeBrun, they were elated. They were like, wow, we're getting off scot-free. We got all this stuff, money, Ed is dead, and no one knows it's us. They think it's this guy Tim. How Tim got the debit card, I have no idea. But police ended up booking him, and he was in prison or jail for 2 months. Because during the 2-month period, so August 16th till about mid-October, Zachary, Robert, and Jonathan would go on a spree of burglaries. They would rob a local Olive Garden. They would also rob a local mini mart, stole thousands of dollars of cash. But ultimately, when Robert was arrested for one of these crimes, he ended up giving the names of Jonathan and Zachary as the suspects of Edward's murder. Now, they went to trial and everything, and ultimately Tim Laney was acquitted of all the charges. But Robert, He was given a life sentence, as he should have. He was going to get the death penalty, but he pleaded guilty to the charges, and this is what got him off with a life sentence. Zachary Grimes, I believe, got 25 to 30 years in prison, so he's probably very close to getting out by now. And Jonathan Coffey received 30 to 35 years because he had more of an involvement with the murder of Edward LeBron. So, yeah, very, very tragic story. Is it a way for someone to die? I don't know. But I'm coming up on the LeBrun family headstone here. And right down here is Edward LeBron's final resting place. February 15th, 1960, died August 16th, 1999. We love and miss you so much. And it has the logo of Edward's record store, Spins, right there. And you have Edward's father, Sidney LeBrun. He passed away a little over 5 years ago. I believe he had cancer, also scoliosis. And here is Bernard LeBrun, I believe Sidney's brother. And then back over here you have Norma LeBrun. Get this off here. You have Norma LeBrun, which is Sidney's mother, so Edward's grandmother. And then you have Max LeBrun, Sidney's father, Edward's grandfather. Yeah, all right here. I'll show you one more time. But yeah, if he truly did do these things to these young boys, he was never actually charged with any crime when it came to young men, but a lot of people knew of his darker side, knew of his second kind of life, so to speak. So if he really did do those things, then I would say that maybe this punishment was well deserved. So I am not here to pay my respects to Edward or anything, but I will just say that in a way, I'm kind of sorry for the way you went out. But maybe, just maybe, it was justified. But yeah, Edward LeBron, the godfather of rave music, the king of rave back in the 90s here in Greensboro. Crazy. But if Edward really did do these things to these young men, these young boys I should say, maybe justice was served. Maybe the way he went out was justified. Because there's one thing in this life that I have zero tolerance for, and that is a grown man or even a grown woman to have any inappropriate contact with a minor. So if Edward really did do these things, if he really did take these young boys back to his house, drink with them, do drugs with them, get them in bed, yeah, I would say justice was done very well to Edward LeBron. But I'm curious to know what you all think. Do you think that the way he went out was justified? Would you have done it differently? Very curious. Did you know Edward? Maybe through a friend? Do you remember the Spins record store back in Greensboro in the 90s? Babylon, any of the nightclubs? Maybe seeing him in the clubs DJing? Let me know. I am very curious to see if anyone knows about this case or even knew Edward, because I didn't. So, but yeah, really cool to come out here and see his grave, even though I'm not paying my respects or anything, but still cool to come out here and see his grave. But yeah, it's going to do it for this video. Thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. On to the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, and I will see you all then.